Welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod Jehoda, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, it's Matt Morris.
Dungeons & Dragons is a game built upon the idea of customization, of making a character your own, making a character that represents yourself, something you want to be, or something you've never even thought of yourself as, something totally disconnected. But sometimes as you play, you begin to think that maybe the barbarian's rage ability might make sense for your fighter, or perhaps your druid decides that they want to be a bit more aggressive and heeds the call of the paladin. Whatever the reason, you crave to add the abilities of another class to your own, and the best way to do this is, of course, by something called multiclassing. But Matt, what is multiclassing? When or why would it be appropriate?
That's a good question. Multiclassing is taking some levels in a class that is not your primary class. And that could vary. It could be just taking a single level in another class, or half and half, maybe. When and why is appropriate? Well, this is a good question. Like you mentioned in our little intro there might be some times that you think your character is branching out a little bit, and there are some aspects of another class that you might like for flavor reasons, or something that suits the personality of your character. I think oftentimes what is alluring about taking a level in another class is getting access to either subclasses or abilities that other class has that your primary class doesn't, and that can build upon your primary class and, make your character maybe a little bit more efficient. Or to borrow a phrase from Nerdarchy, to maximize and optimize your character.
Multiclassing is when instead of leveling up your character in the same class, rogue, fighter, whatever, you instead choose to take a level in another class. And you can do that at any time you would normally level. So for example, if you're a 5th level fighter and you take a level in barbarian, you are now a 6th level character with 1 level in barbarian and 5 in fighter, which was your starting class.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that I think finding a narrative reason is really much more interesting when you play as opposed to just, I want to optimize. Not that the optimization should not be considered, because if there's not synergy, then what's really the point?
Right.
But finding a reason narratively to take that jump, I think creates a lot of fun both for the player and gives the DM some options. If you have any questions or thoughts or concerns about it, just have a little chat with your dungeon master, talk it through, and see what they think. They might have an option that you hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about the flavor. It makes more sense, I think, just for narrative reasons and for the campaign and for your character and all that. If it kind of ties in, It may be mechanically advantageous to have, this pairing with this pairing. But if you're doing it just for that reason, again, maybe consult with your DM. They may not care,
Right. And it totally depends on the table in the game that you're playing, right?
Right, yeah.
But maybe your thief wants to gain a little bit of spell casting, and they're a level 6 rogue, they took the thief archetype, so the arcane trickster is already out of possibility for them. But they could dip into sorcerer or wizard. They could unlock some potential or have some traumatic event from a spellcaster that activates their spell casting from their sorceress origin. Or maybe they've decided to start studying magic in an effort to boost themselves, and so they gain a level in wizard.
Yeah.
Maybe your fighter finds religion and becomes a paladin. Or maybe your druid finds something deep and dark in nature from ancient times and becomes a little bit of a warlock.
Yeah, it could be something you didn't plan for at the beginning, and maybe it's something in the campaign that inspires you to do something. And I think if you can justify it, even if it's a stretch, your DM's probably going to be along for the ride.
Yeah, I think whatever the reason, as long as you and your DM are cool with it, then it's a choice you can entertain, and a choice that gives both the player and the DM a lot more options and a lot more fun and power to play with and to make the game more interesting.
I did want to touch on something else too, a stipulation that you mentioned already. When you are multiclassing, because you are taking your level, but in another class, you still have a maximum of 20. So like Jarrod said, if you're level 5 of one class, you take another level in another class, you are still level 6. Basically what that means is if you are fighter primary class and you only took 1 level in rogue, you can only get to level 19 as a fighter because that still equals 20.
Yep, and as soon as you do that, you will never get that 20th level fighter ability or rogue ability or whatever. So as long as you're okay with that, go for it.
Yeah. So it's worth noting that it's a give and take. You are usually multiclassing to get the benefits of another class at the expense of not getting all of the benefits at the high end of your primary class. It's also maybe important to note that not every campaign plays all the way to level 20. I think, I looked it up actually earlier, the average, and I don't know where they get this data necessarily, but I think the average is about level 10.
Yeah, a lot of campaigns either peter out due to commitment problems, or they finish a story arc, or people have just grown tired of playing those characters. There's a lot of factors that go into it.
10's probably on the high end, actually.
It's true. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting some characters in my campaign up to 20. I think it'd be really cool to actually make it to that precipice.
Yeah.
Not only to create those stories and have that excitement, but also to just say we did it and see how long it took us.
Yeah, that's quite the achievement.
I think it's a fun goal to have. Matt, I think you bring up a really good point that you don't get everything from a new class when you multiclass. I think that's something we need to talk about, and I think we first need to start with what the requirements are of multiclass, because you do have to meet certain requirements to multiclass. And you can find these requirements either on D&D Beyond or on page 163 of the Player's Handbook. The requirements are based on the class you want to multiclass into. For example, to multiclass into a barbarian, you need to have a strength of at least 13.
Mm-hmm.
Each class requires that you have at least a score of 13 in their main ability score, which varies on the class. Funnily enough, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, and Ranger actually have other options. For example, you can be either a Strength or Dex-based fighter. So to multiclass into Fighter, you need to have a 13 in either of those scores, but you don't need to have it in both.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? If you were playing a wizard, but you wanted to have the rage ability for some reason, but you have a strength of 9, justifying that you're a barbarian, bit of a stretch. So prerequisites make sense.
Yes. The drawback of multiclassing is that you still have to complete the full XP gap to completely level to your next character level before advancing in either of your class levels. You do get that first level full hit dice from the class you take, so you get all D8 plus con or whatever, depending on the class level that you choose. And your proficiency bonus is always based on your character level for everything, regardless of what your class level is. Cantrips also go off of character level as opposed to class level. So even if you don't get spellcasting until you multiclass when you're a character level 6, your cantrip dice will still be considered a 5th level cantrip.
Which is very cool.
It is. It's like you get a little more boost. You do gain some class proficiencies, but you do not gain all of them. And that list can also be found on D&D Beyond or on page 164 of the Player's Handbook. Like I said, you do gain new hit dice from your class, and you can roll them at any time you would your base class. It may be a different size die that you use, so you have to track it a little bit differently. And you gain all class features. So that means that you'll get extra attacks from Fighter, or sneak attack from Rogue, or cunning action from Rogue, or unarmored defense from Barbarian. So you do get the class features that you want. However, not all of them stack. For example, Channel Divinity, extra attack, and unarmored defense. You can only get unarmored defense from one source. So if you are a monk, barbarian, multiclass, you only get unarmored defense from one of those. And you can pick which one you want. That's kind of the good thing about multiclassing. If you do have something from multiple sources, you can pick whichever one you want to use as the source. Channel Divinity is a little tricky because you always gain new options for your Channel Divinity. So if you are a Paladin Cleric, you might have 4 Channel Divinity options.
Yeah.
But you don't gain additional uses in that ability until one of your classes tells you that you do. So for example, if you're a Paladin and you have 2 uses of Channel Divinity, and then you multi-class into Cleric, who also has 2 uses of Channel Divinity, you do not get 4, you only get 2. But you have all the Channel Divinity options open to you from both classes.
These are some important stipulations to consider before you dive in, so that will definitely probably help direct you into what multi-class direction you may want to go. If that sounds too complicated, for instance, you could choose to not have a class that doubles up on things, because maybe you're trying to expand your character's abilities a little bit more.
Right. All of these options and restrictions are listed on D&D Beyond on a table in the multiclassing section and on the tables on page 163 and 164 of the Player's Handbook. So even if you are not exactly following along with what we are saying, check out those resources because I know we're using the words multiclass and class repetitively. It can become word soup very quickly.
Yeah, and sometimes a visual aid is just really nice. I'm a visual person myself, so.
Absolutely. We've talked about feats previously, and how feats are one way to customize a character, but now we're talking about multiclassing, which is another way to customize a character.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about feats versus multiclassing when it comes to that?
I think, in general, the multiclassing is probably a much more specific choice that, like we mentioned before, probably takes a little more time to consider how it makes sense for your character, your playstyle, your backstory, etc. Not to say that feats don't need that consideration either, but I just feel on some levels it is a bolder choice, maybe. I think, though, in terms of what you get as a character, it's just worth looking at. I mean, it's sort of the same thing comparing, do I do the ability score increase or do I choose a feat? You know, you're looking at the same things. What are your benefits? There are certain classes that you will get arguably more bonuses. An example, Cleric. At level 1, you can pick Cleric Domain. So not only do you get class features of a Cleric, you also get whatever domain you choose and those features. So, in some cases, that might give you more for your character and what you want to get out than just a single feat will.
When multiclassing, I think it takes more than one investment. In a lot of cases, I think you need to be like, okay, I'm going to dip into 3 levels of fighter in order to get my fighter archetype. Or I'm going to dip into 2 levels of rogue so I get cunning action.
Right, that is true. That's important. And when we say dip, it's just talking about just taking a few levels of something, dipping in.
Right. Imagine your base class is the chip, and the extra classes that you want to dip into is the guacamole or the salsa.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they complement each other.
You just get a little bit on the end there, then you're good.
Generally speaking, you need more of one than the other. I made a joke about doing half and half earlier. I'm sure you could. I don't know anyone that has.
Well, I actually have some math for you on that.
Okay.
Based on the 13 base classes that are available on D&D Beyond, which includes Artificer all the way down through Wizard, there are 78 different combinations of dual classes available.
Okay.
Which is like Artificer Bard, Wizard Warlock. As long as you are just 2 classes, there are 78 different combinations. However, you don't have to just dip into one other class. If you multi-class twice for a total of 3 classes, there are 286 different combinations that you can get in multiclassing.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
That being said, some will be great and some will be less great.
That's very true.
Multiclassing can make you more versatile in that way, but it does mean you'll never get certain higher level abilities of your core class. And you also can't swap or trade levels in a class. You can't be like, oh, well, I took 2 levels of fighter, but I'm not really digging it. Can I go back and make it so I was always a paladin? Nope, that's not how the world works. That's not how the game works.
You can't untrain.
Exactly. Whereas feats are a great way to customize the character specifically, and we talked about that a lot on our feats episode, so feel free to go back and check that out if you have not already. But the good thing about those feats is that they let you gain specific talents and abilities that your character couldn't gain any other way, and it travels with you throughout the life of your character.
That's true. I think the biggest consideration is, like we've said, is the sort of compromise, the give and take. Taking certain levels in another class means certain bonuses you will not get access to down the line, for the most part, from just general advice on the internet and searching YouTube channels that talk a lot about D&D. I feel that 1 to 3 levels in another class is pretty standard multiclassing.
Yes, I would agree.
So you're not going too far into something. But like we said, that's a pretty big commitment if you're got your eye on something that a certain class only gets at level 3. Here's the difference, though. Feats, you can only pick every so many levels, right?
Yeah, anytime you would get an ability score improvement, that's the only time you could take a feat.
Exactly. Whereas with multiclassing, every time you level, you can make the choice. You can say at level 3, I'm going to pick this and then go from there. And so some big bonuses may come along with that if you got your eye on a class that you want to multiclass into that gets a certain benefit at level 1, 2, or even 3.
Yeah, you're totally right. Now that we've kind of talked about multiclassing a little bit, let's talk about some good or some bad combos. I've already talked a little bit about the math involved, so already you've got a plethora of options. Even if we just look at the quote-unquote base 78 combinations of dual classing available, there's still so many options that you have. When thinking about multiclassing, you can think about how your high stats might play into helping you out, what will give you a lot of synergy. For example, barbarians and fighters go really well together because a lot of fighters, if you're going that route, demand a high strength. Therefore, a barbarian and a fighter will have a good synergy, so the multiclassing becomes a lot of fun. Not only that, a raging barbarian using an action surge is a very powerful build.
Yeah, very much so.
However, multiclassing a barbarian into a wizard may be not only difficult, but slightly pointless, because a raging barbarian cannot cast spells. So it's a little bit helpful to think about how classes can complement each other. Fighter warlocks can be a lot of fun, monk rogues, paladin sorcerers, warlock paladins. Wizard rogues can be a little bit useful, but you'll never get your highest level spells, which is a major downside if you're playing a wizard, because wizards are all about that arcane power, and if you dip into any other class, you're gonna sacrifice set, which maybe that's okay, but if your base class is a wizard, if you want to play a wizard, I don't think it is worth multiclassing into anything else. I think you're better off just sticking straight wizard.
Mm-hmm.
Fighter is a really nice class to dip into for just about anybody for a variety of reasons. You get armor proficiencies, you can get extra attacks, fighting styles, and you get some D10 as your hit dice, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, that is true. Taking that higher hit die can be huge. I agree with you. I think that there are a few combos that probably are ill-advised, or perhaps a few classes that are just not worth taking if it's not your primary class. We kind of mentioned last night while we were playing Newly Forged that if you're already an artificer, you don't really get much benefit multiclassing, but some other classes might benefit from taking a level artificer. There are some, like fighter, that are really easy to bolster just about any other class in some cases. The Warlock one is actually one that I've seen come up quite a bit if you want to like either boost some spellcasting abilities or get some unique spellcasting abilities, like you even said, Paladin Warlock, even a Sorcerer Warlock, double down on the magic, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
A Rogue is another class that can be useful. So even like doubling something like, I've got a fighter, now I'm going to take some classes in Rogue because maybe I'm a dex-based fighter, and now I have sneak attack because I took just one level in Rogue. Druid is another interesting one to take a couple of levels in. There's some benefits at level 1 because you get Wild Shape, even though it is just basic Wild Shape and you may never level it up. If you're maybe a nature-leaning class already, that could be interesting. If you take 2 levels in Druid, then you could pick a Circle and then open some more options up for your Wild Shape if you went with Circle of the Moon. Cleric, which we mentioned earlier, gives access to a domain at first level. I won't name them all, but that's just one of those classes that is unique, that you get extra benefits by only taking 1 level.
Right.
There might be some conflicting things, though, like we mentioned earlier, if you were a Paladin Cleric. That might make a lot of sense from a divine point of view, but it could maybe complicate things when you're starting to sort out your channel divinity. There's just a few examples.
Right, and that's not to say that other things can't be done, or that you can't do certain things.
Right.
For example, if you're a wizard and you take a level in Cleric, that will help you gain some armor proficiency.
Yes. I forgot about that.
And if you go into Fighter, you can get Action Surge. And here's the cool thing about Action Surge. Action Surge gives you an additional action. So, according to the Sage Advice Compendium, you could actually cast 2 spells.
Yes, you're right, because it's the only exception, isn't it?
Yes. Per Jeremy Crawford, if you cast a spell, such as a healing word with a bonus action, you can cast another spell with your action, but it must be a cantrip. Keep in mind that this particular limit is specific to spells that use a bonus action. For instance, if you cast a second spell using Action Surge, you aren't limited to casting a cantrip with it.
Because it's a full action.
For example, if you are a fighter wizard, you can bonus action Misty Step, Firebolt, cantrip, and then boom, Fireball with Action Surge.
Yeah.
Which, that's a pretty sick move. Now, your Action Surge depends on your level, how many times you can get that. But it's a cool ability that you could potentially exploit.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually meant to tack another thing onto Cleric, and you brought up a good combo. Wizard Cleric makes you into a pretty powerful battle mage if you wanted to go that route. As we talked about with the feats last time, we mentioned, what if you were a wizard? You wanted to wear armor. Well, you'd have to take a feat for this, and you'd have to take a feat to get medium armor. Then you have to take a feat. Well, take a level in Cleric, heavy armor, battle mage.
Problem solved.
And you get a domain.
Yeah, and in some settings there is a god of magic, so that could work out for you narratively. Settings without a god of magic, or where that kind of combination is rare, that could be a fun narrative explanation.
That's true, yeah. This does circle back to, trying to justify it in some way could get a little tricky. Maybe Warlock is a nice combo, because anyone can make a pact.
I think Warlock adds a nice bit of flavor to any class,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't really make much sense to do so.
My favorite is the Sorcerer Warlock, because they're already basically born with magic, and yet they're still like, I want a little extra. I'm going to make a little deal with some.
Right, and they're already charisma-based class, so...
Synergy.
That's the synergy we were talking about earlier. But I think kind of a less great combo would be something like a monk with any sort of spellcasting class.
Yeah, that's fair.
Since you'd pretty much be giving up numerous physical melee attacks for the ability to occasionally cast spells. It could be interesting roleplay, but I think you'd end up regretting a lot of things over time.
We sort of mentioned this, I think, too, with feats, because there's a feat that allows certain classes that don't have access to spellcasting to get spellcasting. And I would maybe say the same here. I don't know if it's always wise to take a level in something just to gain spellcasting.
Yeah, the Magic Initiate feat is a much easier way to do that.
Yeah.
Especially if you are using the human variant player race option, because then you get a feat at first level.
Which is also very cool.
One fun little feature we have here on Mid-Level Adventurers is our Tavern Corner, where we talk about what we are imbibing today. So Matt, what are you imbibing in the tavern today?
I'm imbibing something different today. I pulled out something that I almost forgot about. I was able to take, before COVID happened in full effect in the US and the world shut down, I was fortunate enough to be able to take a trip to Peru. And while I was there, in a place called Ica, I was able to pick up some of the sort of national spirit there. If you don't know what it is, it's pisco. Have you heard of this?
No.
Yeah, you start the process of making pisco with grapes.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of being a wine, you distill it. So it's like making a whiskey almost with grapes. It might actually be more similar to how they make tequila. But yeah, anyway, it's pretty unique. So anyway, that's what I'm drinking tonight. I'm drinking some pisco, and it is clear.
Oh, yeah, that's really clear, which I guess coming from grapes should not be too much of a surprise.
Right. With any spirit, actually, what makes the color in it is the aging in wood. So pisco, more often than not, is unaged. But I pointed that out because you will find some pisco that has some color to it sometimes because they've added some fruit to it. Fun fact here, the main drink in Peru, if you go to visit, is the pisco sour. It's a cocktail they make with pisco, sour mix, and egg white. But anyway, I'm just drinking it straight tonight. It's kind of nice. It's almost like sake in a way, but you get some of the grape notes, but it's definitely got that alcohol burn. This one happens to be very smooth. They don't always recommend sipping it. A lot of the pisco I think they will sell you is, it's almost for like shooting. But anyway, that's a little fun, unique one that I'm having tonight. So how about you? What are you imbibing?
Well, I am not nearly so wonderfully adventurous this evening, unfortunately. Not to say what I'm drinking is bad, it's just much more local. I have gone back to Harpoon Brewery.
Yeah.
I have gone back up to Massachusetts, not literally, figuratively, because for some reason I saw that they have already put out their Winter Warmer Holiday Ale.
Wow.
Which, it's not even Halloween yet, and I feel kind of bad for buying it on retrospect, but at the same time, I needed something new and something different, and I've never had this before.
Yeah, and you've already done a pumpkin beer.
Yeah, and it claims on the front that it is a cinnamon and nutmeg holiday ale.
Okay.
It's got a cute little top hat and corncob pipe on the label as though Frosty has melted, which I think is funny.
That's really great.
But it's fairly smooth to drink, and it goes down easy. You don't even taste the cinnamon and nutmeg until the very end on the tail. And it's a surprisingly bitter afternote.
Okay.
It's not super aggressively bitter, but it is a little bit bitter. Personally, I'm not sure how much it affects the actual flavor of the ale.
It's more of the aftertaste.
Yeah, I feel the ale is very, very smooth. The aftertaste is a very brisk departure from the rest of the drinking experience.
I see.
I should preference that it is not bad. Just the aftertaste is a very quick departure considering what the rest of the drinking experience of the ale is.
Sure.
When I drink it, I don't taste much cinnamon. I do taste the nutmeg, but only right before that tail end of bitterness kind of overwhelms the tongue for a quick second.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes those added flavors I don't always get strong notes of.
I do think this ale would pair actually really well with like a roast chicken. Or something to that effect. I think a spiced meat would go really well with it, actually, and that would probably help counteract a bit of the bitterness that I'm tasting. Again, it's not bad. It's just got a quick departure.
Well, cheers. This would be a weird thing to see side by side, my clear spirit and your dark ale, but clink.
And that's what we're imbibing today. But you bring up conflicting abilities, and I think we should talk about that, because it is possible that you might get conflicting abilities. For example, unarmored defense and heavy armor proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
They're conflicting abilities. If you're a fighter and a barbarian, you get both of those.
Yeah.
So you have to choose which one you want. You can wear plate mail because you're a fighter, but in doing so, you do not gain the benefits of unarmored defense, and you don't even get rage from your barbarian class, because rage only grants benefits when you aren't wearing heavy armor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a fighter, you could also be wearing medium armor and still gain those benefits from your barbarian levels. So make sure to really read and understand all the restrictions of the various abilities you get to make sure you're getting the most out of your druid, ranger, fighter, barbarian, what have you.
That's a very good point. And it may not matter. Maybe the answer to you is easy. Like, great, my fighter's going to not have armor on, so I can rage, and that's just what he does.
And it might be that your constitution's not really that great, so maybe you do still want that medium armor, but you still get your rage ability from the barbarian class, even in the medium armor. So that's kind of a best of both worlds scenario. Now, you mentioned this actually, you brought this up. Spellcasting as a source when multiclassing.
Yes.
The reason spellcasting from multiple sources can be a little bit tricky is because there is some math involved. Most classes, 8 out of the 13 base classes that we've been using, have spellcasting as a feature. Artificer, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Paladin, Ranger, Sorcerer, and Wizard all have spellcasting as a class feature. Now, if you have spellcasting from multiple sources, you prepare the spells you know for each of those classes individually. So, if you have the spellcasting ability from Druid and Sorcerer, you prepare your Druid spells and your Sorcerer spells individually as if you were only a Druid or a Sorcerer respectively, using the spellcasting ability from the respective class. And then when it comes down to your spell slots, you add together all your levels in Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, and Wizard classes, plus half of your levels in Paladin and Ranger, rounded down in the event of an uneven number, and half of your levels in Artificer, but rounded up instead. Now, that number you get is your multi-class spellcaster level. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it is all explained on page 165 of the Player's Handbook and in the multiclassing section of D&D Beyond. But you take that number and you look at the table that is there. There is a table on page 165 or in the multiclassing section of D&D Beyond, and that table will tell you how many spell slots you have for your multiclass spellcaster level. Now, with that table and with your result, it is possible that you might have higher level spell slots than spells you actually know. And you can use those slots to cast your lower level spells and even use spells that have higher level effects. For example, if you have 4th level spell slots from the multiclassing table, but you don't actually have any 4th level spells, you can use a 4th level spell slot to cast Fireball and add an additional damage die to that spell.
Which is very cool.
And that's a lot, right?
That is.
That's just if you have spellcasting from more than one source.
Looking at you, Wizard Cleric.
That's right. But not only that, there's pact magic from the Warlock.
Which, as we've discussed previously, is different.
Let's say that you have spellcasting from being a sorcerer, and you find a patron that you really like, so you make a deal with them and become a Warlock as well. So you now have the pact magic feature. You can use the slots you gain from having pact magic to cast any of the spells you know or have prepared from your spellcasting class. So if you're a sorcerer and a Warlock, you can use any of your Warlock spell slots to cast any of your sorcerer spells. Likewise, you can use the spell slots from your spellcasting class to cast any of the Warlock spells that you know. So you don't have to double up on spells to use them on specific slots.
Yeah.
I do understand that it sounds intimidating.
Yeah.
But I do not want to dissuade anyone who may be listening from attempting to do so just because it sounds daunting.
Right.
Yes, it's a little more technical, it's a little more number crunchy, it's a little more complicated. But once you look at the table and you read the section on multiclassing, either on D&D Beyond or in the Player's Handbook, it really does make a lot of sense, and it's very intuitive. There are tables, there are visual aids. It's only going to help you out.
Yeah, the visual aids are nice, and that's not to say I'm shying away from it because it's too complicated or too hard and you should avoid it. No, that's just me. I just see myself and my playing style probably like doubling down, doing a fighter barbarian.
Yeah, it's all about personal play style, definitely.
Yeah, you may really love the slight challenge of balancing two spellcasting classes, and that might be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have never played a spellcasting class for any length of time. Obviously, as I usually DM, I have NPCs that are spellcasting, but NPC spellcasting is quite often a little bit different. Very few of the ones that I have run have been multiclassed, so it hasn't been too much of an obstacle for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
So all that being said, I think we should wrap up on our little intro to multiclassing episode here. I think that multiclassing creates a great many opportunities, both for combat, social interaction with game mechanics, but I think it really creates and guides compelling narrative. What would cause a stalwart paladin to turn to an ancient entity for strange or newer crazy powers? Why would a disciplined fighter choose to give up her plate armor that was handed down through generations of her family and give herself over to the anger and frustrations in her heart? No one really knows until the story is told at your table. Multiclassing is a great way to customize a character and make it truly unique. I have personally seen Fighter Bard Warlocks, I've seen Ranger Rogue Clerics, I've seen Monk Clerics, I've seen Paladin Barbarians, and my first ever character, back in the 3.5 days, was actually a Fighter Barbarian.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, if it's going to make you happy and your character more fun for you, then go for it. Give it a shot. Try it. Do it up. This is a game meant to be played. There isn't a wrong way to make a character. Take our advice. If you want to play that wizard barbarian, you go ahead, you do it. Maybe it's a Jekyll and Hyde idea. Maybe the barbarian side is a result of some arcane experiment. Who knows? Make it fun for you.
Yeah. That's a really good idea, actually. I'd like to also add, we didn't explicitly say it, Jarrod has mentioned it, that you can take more than just one class when you're multiclassing. It could be a very cool possibility. If you want some more help or just some more insight onto multiclassing and rules, there are some resources out there on the YouTube. Matt Mercer via Critical Role has, I just discovered a pretty cool little series called Handbook or Helper. We've actually, I think, mentioned it before.
Yeah, we've talked about Handbook or Helper before. The multiclassing episode is really great.
I haven't explored it myself, but I came across it today when I was doing some research. It's, I'm sure, chock full of good info. Some other channels I like to peruse every now and then. Taking 20 is one. I mentioned Nerdarchy earlier. Dungeon Dudes, WebDM, those guys. They all have episodes on multiclassing.
And just the amount of people who have done an episode or multiple episodes shows how much information there is on this topic, how broad it is, and how many options you actually have when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it can sound overwhelming, but really, the more you listen to it, get some people's thoughts and ideas, and form your own, that's not too bad. A lot of it starts to make sense.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us on this episode. Come back next week as we dive into a discussion on the consequences and character death. We're going a little dark for the spooky season that we are in.
Mm-hmm.
Remember to check out our friend and the composer of all music used here on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivy, on SoundCloud.com. And please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure. Give us a like, give us a shout out, give us a retweet, join in on the conversation.
Please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com, and feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com. And you can watch Jarrod and I on Newly Forged, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/newlyforged. That's NUULIFORGED.
And as always, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Mind the traps and keep adventuring.